When will the first quarterback get drafted? That and more this week on the couch. Chris Trapasso, when will the first quarterback get drafted in 2 weeks?
I'm going to give a two-part answer here. If Travon Walker, the edge rusher from Georgia, goes number 1 overall, I think the first quarterback will be picked at number 6 overall to the Carolina Panthers, probably Kenny Pickett. Now, if Aiden Hutchinson goes number 1 overall, I could see the Detroit Lions picking Malik Willis. It just kind of feels like the best case scenario, and I'll give you some reasons why. Number 1, Dan Campbell and their GM Brad Holmes, they obviously have a connection with Jared Goff. They love Jared Goff. Just last week, Dan Campbell said you don't need elite quarterback play to win in the NFL. I don't know if that's necessarily what he believes or that's a draft smokescreen. I think Dan Campbell last year proved to be a lot smarter and a lot more progressive with a lot of football philosophies than we were expecting. And beyond their love for Jared Goff, I think the Lions believe, and are not crazy to think so, that they could actually be a decently competitive team in 2022, especially in a little bit of a watered down NFC. If that's the case, they probably will not be in position in 2023 to get a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young, whatever the case may be, whoever else ascends the quarterback draft boards. And it feels like next year will be a little better than what we had in this draft class. So there are other teams that are better positioned to trade up to be picking near the top of the draft to get one of those premier prospects. So draft Malik Willis, sit him behind your quarterback that you like in Jared Goff, get more competitive, and then that's the cushy situation for Malik Willis to take over then in Detroit in 2023.
Okay, let's talk. There's so many things to tease apart here. Chris, follow him at Chris Trapasso, Trapasso, CBS Sports draft expert. And there's so many things to tease apart here. And this is why I love the draft, because any topic in the draft is an on-ramp to any other football topic. It's all interconnected, right? The draft is where everything intersects. So just from your answer to that question, we can probably spend the whole rest of the hour talking about things that sprout off from that. But let's start with Malik Willis. Because anywhere from, like you said, Malik Willis number 2 to Daniel Jeremiah, Malik Willis not in his first round mock. I think that I saw Bruce Feldman's mock. Maybe he felt like number 30. I mean, these are people that are in the know.
For sure.
And then we also always have to tease apart the job of a draft expert is first to give their take or their perception, but also you have to always factor in, well, what will the teams do, even if we disagree? Malik Willis at number 2, I guess the easiest place to start, Chris, is that something you would disagree with, or is it a move that you think is rational given all the variables for the Lions?
I think it's really rational. I mean, I kind of spoke to it just before that. I think from a team building perspective, it makes a lot of sense because yes, Malik Willis is my quarterback number 1, but I wouldn't advocate him starting week 1 and not only starting week 1, but having high expectations for him out of the gate. So in Detroit, he would be in no position that he feels forced into the starting lineup. It seems as though in November and December last year, the Lions got what they wanted out of Jared Goff. He played a lot better. I think having the 2 first round picks, a bunch of extra selections, they can address the wide receiver spot. They can build the trenches of their defense and again, be a little bit more competitive than we would expect for a team with a second selection in the draft. I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender or a team that could win the NFC North, but I don't think it's out of the question for the Lions to go around 500 this season. They were in a bunch of close games last year, lost a bunch of games, last second field goals, the Justin Tucker field goal early in the season. So it just feels like any other scenario. If he goes to Atlanta at number 8 overall, Marcus Mariota's there. There's the connection to Arthur Smith. But if he doesn't play well the first 3 or 4 games, it feels like the fans in Atlanta, with Malik Willis being a Georgia native, would be really pining for Malik Willis to see the field. And I don't think that would be the best thing for his development. So it's part I like Malik Willis as a top 10 overall player in this class. And I just think in Detroit, really getting that Patrick Mahomes and kind of that Trey Lance full redshirt season would be the best thing for himself as a quarterback
Right.
and for the Lions moving forward.
How much of Malik Willis, as you said, being a top 10 player in this class, of course, top 10 player, including positional value. And
For
if
sure.
and what's nice is as the numbers get bigger, Chris, we really can have an idea of at least what the league thinks. Maybe it's not what we would think, but it's what the league thinks about importance of positions. You can just take those top cap numbers, the franchise tag numbers, and it gives you a picture. And of course, quarterback's far and away number one. Now, how much of Malik Willis being a top 10 player in this class is because the top 10 isn't that good. It isn't really up to the typical top 10 standards.
That's definitely part of it. Like you mentioned, I put a big factor of positional value in my on my big board in my grading system, the scouting grade book, just because I'm evaluating an entire draft class. I think when teams say, "Hey, we only pick best player available," they stack their boards based on their needs, and then they go best player available. I'm looking at the draft from afar and just saying, "Hey, I'm going to pretend like I'm starting a new franchise this season." So I give quarterbacks a huge boost. Running backs, not so much. I give wide receivers a big boost. I give edge rushers, offensive tackles. So it's positional value, and you're right. I like some of the players, of course, at the top of this draft class. Some players I believe would be worthy of being top half of the first round selections in any draft, but it definitely feels less top heavy than really any draft that I can remember scouting. Maybe 2013, right when I got into it, that draft class, which ultimately was
EJ Manuel.
really bad. Yeah, the EJ Manuel draft. The top 10 there was really bad looking back on it. It feels similar to that class more so than any others that I've scouted.
Yeah, and similar to that class also, I think a lot of tackles, edge at the top of that class too,
Yes.
that flamed out. So you got to use the picks. I would hope that teams amongst themselves are talking about how this is not a good top 10 class. It's almost like the football gods have a sense of humor, Chris, because this is the draft that the Jets and the Giants have multiple top 10 picks. So, of course, when the Jets and Giants have multiple top 10 picks, who cares? Who really wants a top 10 pick? So there's Malik Willis. Well, let me ask you real quick, as a quick offshoot of that, is Kenny Pickett, in your opinion, a top 10 player in this class?
He's not a top 10 player, but he is my number 2 quarterback, and I think he's worthy of a first-round pick.
Okay. So, again, unpacking this, not a great draft class, at the top especially. You say this hinges on the decision that Jacksonville is going to make. And first of all, it's Jacksonville. It's Trent Baalke. So whatever decision we would make if we had to choose between Travon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson, we can't project that's what they're going to do. Aiden Hutchinson certainly has been, if we look at it like a horse race, Chris, he's been out ahead of the pack for a while. But now, like you said, it's in the conversation about Travon Walker. At one point, that choice was Hutchinson or Thibodeaux, and maybe Detroit. Another way that this hinges too is, what does Detroit think of Thibodeaux? What does Detroit think of Walker as the other side of that scale with Malik Willis? But let's talk about these guys, these edge rushers. Although in the case of Walker and Hutchinson, really, they're not true edges, right? They're not bendy edges. They're not shot out of a gun around the corner edges. So I guess we can start with, what would your decision be? And do you think it's valid that they're close enough that this is a decision?
Yeah, I would definitely go Aiden Hutchinson over Travon Walker. And we can talk at length about Travon Walker because he is my one buyer beware prospect in this draft class. Last year, it was Gregory Rousseau, who the Bills picked late in the first round. I just feel like Travon Walker is actually, to go back to that 2013 draft class, the comparison that I have for him is Ziggy Ansah. Someone sent it to me on Twitter, and I thought it was perfect because Ansah came into the league out of BYU, pretty raw, not a great pass rusher, but 6'5", 270, long arms, had all the tools, turned in a pretty good professional career.
Yeah.
I don't think he lived up to being a top 5 overall pick. That's how I feel about Travon Walker, that he's not bendy, like you mentioned. I don't think he plays to the level of athleticism he showed at the combine. Hutchinson's a pretty good athlete. I just love his handwork and his power. I think there's speed to power conversion that's very natural with him. And right now, he can beat NFL tackles in a variety of ways. I don't think Travon Walker can do that. But I think Peter Schrager from NFL Network did a great job with this yesterday on Good Morning Football that if you look back at the history of Trent Baalke, picking Aldon Smith over a lot of more polished players, J.J. Watt included in that 2011 draft, Anthony Davis he was a part of from Rutgers, the offensive tackle, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead. He's always gravitated toward these big, freaky specimens more so than, hey, this guy was really productive. There's a high floor to him. That's why I think we're starting to see that Travon Walker hype train for going number 1 overall really taking off the last couple of weeks.
What about Thibodeaux? I mean, should he be in the conversation? In your opinion, is the real conversation the 3 of them, or maybe even the 2 of them without Walker? And I do want to say for the record, Ziggy Ansah did turn out to be a good player. I mean, he actually, his career and Jadeveon Clowney's career aren't that different in terms of the quality of play on the field and what kept them off the field. But you're right we're living 2013 all over again, right? This is what's and Malik Willis is EJ Manuel. Anyway, what about Thibodeaux? What's your opinion on him? And are you surprised that he's not in the conversation for the number 1 pick?
He's my number 2 edge rusher. And yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, for someone that was such a big recruit and for the most part lived up to the hype at Oregon, it's surprising that he isn't still that shoe-in number 1 overall pick. I know Aiden Hutchinson had a remarkable season at Michigan, and that kind of catapulted him to the top of a lot of people's big boards. But the fact that Thibodeaux and the off-field stuff has really seemed to push him down is a little surprising to me. The one thing I will say about Thibodeaux is that he's kind of in between Hutchinson and Walker for me in terms of his polish. I think in college, in the Pac-12, didn't face a ton of outstanding tackles. Thibodeaux could just win with his burst and his bend, speed to power conversion. It was almost like it was too easy for him athletically. There were times where he showed the pass rushing moves, but I don't think he's quite there yet. He's quite number 1 overall pick caliber from that perspective. And then we saw he's 250-ish pounds. The combine workout, the pro day was not like through the roof, like a Myles Garrett-esque workout. So that could be some of the justification why he's not getting it. But in terms of the whole overall pass rushing package and that he can be a 3-down player, I think he's very good against the run. He actually reminds me a lot of Danielle Hunter. Different profile in terms of production. But if you look at his athleticism, the length, just the overall size of those 2 players, he feels like a Danielle Hunter type. And I think anyone in a redraft would be considering Danielle Hunter as a top pick. So it's a little surprising that Thibodeaux is falling, but I'm not going to be shocked if he goes a lot earlier than people think. And this was all just a smokescreen from a team later in the top 10 or outside the top 10, trying and hoping to get Kayvon Thibodeaux to fall to them.
Right. Because if it is true, the off the field stuff, and what is the off the field stuff when it comes to Thibodeaux? That he speaks his mind, that he's not a robot,
it's weird.
that he hasn't figured out that what the NFL likes is for you to be a robot in public. I mean, I don't know if it's anything more substantive than that. And the reality is, I think the good organizations would see through that anyway. And we'll see, or it may be something coming from Oregon. And by the way, keeping the eerie 2013 parallels, Chris, the Oregon edge, lengthy, bendy, it's too easy for him. Number 3 pick Dion Jordan. So it's eerie, right? It's eerie. So that's the conversation at the top of the draft. I guess let me do this real quick, like just for the folks that are just getting caught up, because wow, what an offseason in the NFL as it has been. The draft is usually the culmination of the offseason, but this year I wonder, because the class is a little underwhelming and because March was a month like we've never seen before. So you're just getting caught up. This is like the elevator pitch, right? Real quick. Like, you stop me in the hallway. You're the agent for each one of these guys. Give me the elevator pitch for each one of these guys as the number 1 pick. You're talking to Trent Baalke. So what's the pitch for Hutchinson to go number 1?
The Hutchinson pitch would just be look at his production against quality competition. And I think the fact that he got better every season, that he could even pitch himself and say, hey, look, as a sophomore, I flashed a little bit. Junior, I got a little bit better. My senior season, I was tremendous. I still have my best football in front of me. I think the productivity and in terms of traits, polished traits are definitely there for Aiden Hutchinson.
And it's sad that Detroit didn't get lined up to take him, because it just would have been perfect. And they don't need a tackle. What's the pitch for Walker at number 1?
All upside. If we're into an NFL now where, especially at the quarterback position, teams are really prioritizing upside over high floor, edge rusher is probably the third or fourth most important position on the field. That could be kind of the pitch for him that, hey, I could be Myles Garrett in 3 or 4 seasons, or even to a lesser degree, Rashawn Gary might be a better example, that he kind of was not much of a contributor early in his Green Bay career. This past season, watching his film, Rashawn Gary, I think, was like a top 10 pure pass rusher on the outside, still very young. So I think it would be, hey, I'm all upside. I have all the physical and athletic traits that you could really build in a lab if you were kind of creating that edge rusher for the NFL.
Yeah. This is why Walker, like you said earlier, to Jacksonville has some steam, and then Thibodeaux, I think you made the case already for him as the number 1 pick. So we'll see that. Not quarterbacks at the top of the board, edge driving it. Then we'll see some tackles go off the board, and I think these are probably better tackles than I don't know. I mean, I guess we really thought highly of Luke Jokel back then. Eric Fisher was a little bit more of projection. Lane Johnson worked out. There's your guy carrying the flag for this class, right? He worked out. I mean, I think it's fair to say, Evan Neal, Icky. I mean, these guys, I think they're going to be good picks. I mean, it's almost because Jacksonville and Detroit don't need tackles. You almost wonder if you just stacked a board, if it was an expansion draft, let's say, if you might not go with one of these tackles. But you mentioned number 6. That's, I think, probably the most common answer. And I like that you threw a little bit of a curveball there for the first quarterback to go off the board. Kenny Pickett, like you said, he's your number 2 quarterback. You have the connection here that Matt Rule originally recruited him. But I don't want to, we've talked a lot about Kenny Pickett over the last month or so on the show. I want to talk about first the quarterbacks in general. And I'm going to make another 2013 parallel, right? I don't even know what the fashion would be for 2013. It all blends together, like the aughts and the teens, right? And it's like if we said we're going back to 1984, like you can right away know how to dress for that, put music to put on. 2013 is not long enough ago. But going back to 2013, we had quarterbacks. EJ Manuel, a lot of people at the time thought it was a terrible pick at number 16. Although, in hindsight, you can see now the thinking behind it. If you usually want to take a shot at a quarterback in the first round, you're probably taking them in the top 5. And as you get farther into the first round, your risk tolerance gets wider and wider, much wider than it would be at any other position. And then we had some quarterbacks that, depending on who you talk to or who you listen to, maybe we're going to go in the first round. Geno Smith was one. He fell to the early second round, and he's still around, but obviously the league was right, I think, to let him fall to the first round. Matt Barkley, there was credible stuff that he was going to go number 10, leading right up to the draft, right? We see how that turned out. So let's stick with this 2013 parallel because we have, let's say, Chris, 5, maybe 6, and there's some people that have floated out there, 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. I can believe it because of quarterback desperation and the relative quality of these guys. But there's 5 or 6 guys this year. Do you think that we will get out of this class? Well, first, actually, before we get into the specifics of how you think it'll turn out, let me ask you this. When it comes right down to it, I don't know what the over-under is. You can bet all these draft props now, depending on where you live. If I set the over-under, and I just want you to react in the moment, and then we can talk about it a little more in depth. If the over-under for quarterbacks in the first round is 2.5, are you going over-under?
I'm going over. I think Desmond Ridder will be picked a lot earlier than people expect. Maybe not
3.5.
3.5. I was going to say, I think
that's where you would set it.
2 weeks out. I would say 3.5. I would set it.
Yeah. That's where it becomes hard. So you have these other 3 quarterbacks, Corral, Howell, Strong. And there's information like what Strong's need that we're not privy to. So that could explain in hindsight whatever happens. Maybe he gets into the first round. Maybe he falls to the 4th round. Do you think that's so? You think the NFL is going to be patient and not give into quarterback desperation? Maybe it'll be wide receiver desperation. That's a whole different topic. Now, do you think these guys, for the most part, will turn out more like Barkley? I maybe even falling on draft day. Maybe we hear maybe Carson Strong, maybe Corral still there in the third round. We're wondering, what's going on there? And they don't turn into anything. The league is right, or is this going to be more like Derek Carr, Colin Kaepernick, Andy Dalton? I mean, Drew Lock is another second rounder, at kind of a boom bust second rounder, and we see how that turned out. Do you liken these guys more to, hey, the teams that they fall to are lucky teams, or hey, there's a reason they're not going in the first round?
A little bit more leaning toward 2013. And that's not to say that I hate Matt Corral or Sam Howell as prospects. I just think they are way unpolished right now. I think Matt Corral running that almost strictly RPO based offense at Ole Miss. And I get it. There's more RPOs in today's NFL than ever. There presumably will continue to be more of them. I think, though, you can't run an RPO on every single play at the NFL level. And watching Matt Corral, I think his natural accuracy is a major concern, like the ball placement. And when I usually use ball placement, maybe different from other people, ball placement to me, like accuracy is like, it's like general how they throw the football. Can they throw it somewhere in the vicinity of their target? For me, ball placement is on that in-breaking route, on that 15-yard dig route. Where's the ball? Is it in front of him, leading him to yards after the catch, or is it behind him where he has to catch a football and fall and gets tackled? I think Matt Corral, his ball placement is probably third or fourth round caliber. I think his athleticism is pretty good. Will he be able to run 20 times a football game like he did at Ole Miss in a few outings? Probably not. That's kind of the same concern I have for Sam Howell, that in this past season, when he lost all the talent to the NFL, everyone said, hey, it's really just he lost Dimey Brown, he lost Daz Newsome, lost the running backs, and he really had to lean on his legs. Sam Howell is not, of this new age at the quarterback position, a high caliber athlete. So if he tries to lean on his legs early in his career, I think he'll look more like Johnny Manziel trying to run around there than like Deshaun Watson or Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. So will they get a fair shot if they're second or third round picks? I think usually that's not the case. Usually they aren't a quarterback that sees a team build around them at that point. I guess with hindsight, I feel a little better about Sam Howell and Matt Corral than I do some of those 2013 draft prospects. But to answer your question, I'm a little bit lower on that group as a whole, that second tier of the quarterback position in this draft, and feel like there's more of a chance that they kind of go by the way of the 2013 class than anything else.
And it may just come down to destination. Again, it may come down to destination, because if you have these quarterbacks, if our hesitation is, wow, there was so much structure built around them that it was easy, it was low-hanging fruit, all they had to do was just dot the I and cross the T. Well, there are NFL offensive coaches, offensive minds that at least do that to some extent. If he ends up, say, in Tennessee with the structure of their offense, whether we're talking about Howell or Corral, that's different than if they end up in a place where more is going to be put on their shoulders. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch how these guys play out, because I like the idea of getting your quarterback in the second round, Chris, if only because I wonder with guys like Carr and Kaepernick and Dalton, if that second round pedigree reduces expectations, it reduces the calls from the fans to start the player early, it reduces the pressure they put on themselves. They're not anointed, and they can just relax and play football and play up to their peak. But again, if the NFL, especially in this class, right, man, if in this class no NFL team thinks you're worth a first round pick, then that's probably a bad sign. We shall see. You mentioned Desmond Ridder. I'm going to cut you off. I do want to give a treatment to Desmond Ridder. And it's funny, when I think about Ridder, I feel like right now there's a Rorschach ink blot you can hold in front of people. And I think fantasy football does skew this to an extent. And it's Jalen Hurts, right? Like, how would you feel if your team's quarterback was Jalen Hurts right now and you were a GM? In fact, with Philadelphia, this is a really telling exercise, because there they are. Now, they traded out of one of their first round picks. But obviously, if there's a quarterback they want in this class, then there's the denominator of how hesitant are they to feel like we can really commit to Jalen Hurts. But, I almost look at Desmond Ridder, Chris, like a better Jalen Hurts with some of the same limitations, but also some of the same reasons to think you're going to have a player that has some discrete advantages that you can exploit in your offensive game plan. And of course, he, like you said, he may go off the board earlier than people think. Where do you think he could go off the board? Where could he land? And again, this is kind of the pitch for him, as I think it's probably, as you're saying, a team in the first round is going to be explaining to their fans why they took him in the first round.
Yeah, the Jalen Hurts comparison is a good one. I think Hurts is a little bit more athletically capable, but if you look at Desmond Ridder's combine, he tested like a wide receiver. That was kind of the chorus coming out of Indianapolis, that you stack him up against wide receivers at like 6'3" and 220, and he's a high level athlete for the quarterback spot. With Ridder, I think the NFL will really like him because of the athleticism on paper. And for as much as we're chasing upside and we've seen a bunch of one-year wonders, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow go as high as number one overall, I do still think there are front offices, general managers, and coaches that will love the 50 games of experience from Desmond Ridder. And the fact that he was, with a positive connotation to this, a very good game manager on a program that was on the rise during his tenure there, that they got better and better. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes like Jalen Hurts. He can improvise a little bit if he doesn't like what he sees, not going to put the ball in harm's way very frequently. And I could see him, because of all of those things, and I want to hear your thoughts on this because I know you're an expert with this team. The Pittsburgh Steelers feel like a team after transitioning off of Ben Roethlisberger, another smaller school quarterback, could improvise a little bit early in his career, obviously, won a lot of games, was super experienced. It feels like if there is a guy that Kevin Colbert says, hey, I'm not going to trade up for Malik Willis in kind of my swan song here as the GM, but I'll let the draft come to me and just pick Desmond Ridder at number 20 overall. If he liked a lot of those attributes with Ben Roethlisberger, the parallel to that in this quarterback class is Desmond Ridder. And that's why I've penciled in Desmond Ridder in a lot of my mock drafts going number 20 overall to the Steelers.
It's such a great poker game, right? The quarterbacks and the teams that need quarterbacks in this draft. And there's any number of angles that we may watch play out. Let's say there's a very wide range of possibilities, and Jordan Love and Green Bay show us that there's maybe even possibilities that we didn't ponder before they happen, before they drop into our laps, right? And when we look at that and we look at the teams that need quarterbacks, Chris, I mean, or I should say the teams that reasonably should be looking at this class, right? Like if we were a consultant and they would say, what's the most important thing for us to do? We would say, well, first of all, get to know these 6 quarterbacks and decide how much you think they're worth and what you're willing to do on draft day if one of them is available and your pick's coming up, whether you're willing to just let it fall to you. And of course, the other side of that is what you think of the other players in the draft. Don't get me wrong. But there's Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill. You could also make some Ridder Tannehill. Was he like honorable mention? All Big 12 wide receiver. Philly, we talked about that. There's the Giants, and I know it's a new regime, but they have 2 swings at the pinata at 4 and 10, or no, I'm sorry, 5 and 7. They could even potentially trade down and get one of these quarterbacks. I mean, now I know new regime doesn't want to make that decision that early, but this is the train's here. You have to decide whether to get on. Atlanta and Ridder, I hear that a lot. That wouldn't surprise me. There's New Orleans. You mentioned Pittsburgh. Tampa Bay is interesting just because they have the ability to make a luxury pick. And it would make a lot of sense for them to be thinking quarterback in this draft. Now, they know internally what they think about Kyle Trask. Okay. And then Carolina, right? The team that everyone thinks is just desperate and going to fold and take Kenny Pickett at number 6. And what you have here is, okay, New Orleans makes a trade to get 2 first-round picks, which from a financial perspective, the New Orleans-Philadelphia trade made sense for how the teams kind of want to structure their salary growth and things like that. But some say, hey, that's New Orleans plotting to make a move up for Malik Willis. This is like whenever Philadelphia moved up from 13 to 8 before moving up for Carson Wentz. I guess I'm not really even sure what I want to ask you, Chris. I just feel like this is a fascinating poker game because you mentioned the Steelers and Ridder, and the Steelers were connected to Willis right away, right? Mike Tomlin's talking about athleticism. I want athleticism. I want to, extending plays at the quarterback position. And of course, people just automatically make that connection. Now, it doesn't sound like Malik Willis is going to be there when the Steelers are on the clock. And they might not even have the ammo to move up. They don't have as much ammo as New Orleans, right? Like they're not going to be able to meet if New Orleans indeed is moving up for Willis. But maybe it's Desmond Ridder all along, and having that patience helps them win the draft. I guess I'll wind this up this way, Chris. When it comes right down to it, the team that takes which quarterback will be the one that we look back and say, like, yeah, they won the draft. They made the right decision.
I would say probably Steelers with Desmond Ridder if they stay put at 20. In terms of the Saints, just to kind of touch on them to answer this too, having already traded up, and if they were just doing it to get ahead of the Chargers at 17, to pick Trevor Penning, who's presumably going to be the fourth offensive tackle off the board, would not really like the trade very much, although they, of course, have a huge need at left tackle after losing Teron Armstead. If the Saints continue to move up and they pick Malik Willis, I would be fine with that. And I would say, hey, they won the first round. They went all in. That's kind of the new trend in today's NFL. Like, forget about the picks, just get the quarterback. Like with the Rams, with the Buccaneers, the last two drafts, the Bills moved up for Josh Allen. The Chiefs moved up for Patrick Mahomes. The Texans moved up for Deshaun Watson. It almost feels like if you get a good quarterback, if you look back at recent history, outside of having the number one overall pick, teams have traded up to get those quarterbacks. It doesn't guarantee if you trade up that you will get a good one, but the good ones usually were the result of a trade up. If they move up and they pick Desmond Ridder or pick Kenny Pickett, I'll not really be sure what the Saints were ultimately thinking, because to me, Willis is that, yes, a role at the craps table, but one that could become a similar to a Josh Allen or a Deshaun Watson or a Justin Herbert. I don't know if there's another quarterback in this draft class that has that ability, but like you mentioned, maybe some of the teams that are the smarter organizations like the Steelers that are perennial contenders will just say, hey, we'll let all the chaos happen in front of us and gladly pick Desmond Ridder. He might not even need to start right away, seeing that we have Mitchell Trubisky, we have Mason Rudolph here, and maybe by midway through his rookie season, he can start. But what is good about Desmond Ridder, if he does need to start, he has 50 games of collegiate experience, games against Georgia and Alabama and Notre Dame on the road. To me, what was a very impressive performance from him in that outing. He has that kind of high floor. I can start for you. Let me have a good defense. Get me some good receivers. And we know the Steelers are so good identifying those quality pass catchers on day two. And we could look back in 2 seasons and say, look at that. The Saints traded up for Malik Willis. The Panthers picked Kenny Pickett at 6. The Steelers stayed put and got someone that is a high-end game manager that really allowed them to just make a seamless transition from Ben Roethlisberger to their new quarterback.
Yeah, and at a very reasonable price. And the idea being, maybe I could have made the question a little more pointed by saying, assuming Pickett and Willis cost top 10 picks and Ridder costs, a mid to late first round pick, and the others cost a second round pick, which one's the best buy for the price? And I think Ridder is the right answer. And now you're starting to get me emotionally invested in the draft with the idea that as we're doing this live in a few weeks on Thursday night, waiting to see if Ridder, but I was so disappointed when Lamar Jackson fell to the Steelers. I didn't take him. It's hard to get over that. How things could be different. Although, hey, it doesn't necessarily seem certain that Baltimore is going to lock up Lamar Jackson for his career. So I don't know. Well, I think we've laid out a lot of the big storylines. I guess one of the other big storylines is wide receiver, and it's driven by the Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams contracts. 5 wide receivers in the first round. I guess, what? I want to put a quick postscript because I hate to do things in terms of gambling, because I think we're all just going to work for sports gambling companies one day, it appears. Like they're just like the sports gambling world is going to eat like the healthcare is going to eat like Amazon. I don't know, like the human centipede, right? But the over under is a really good way to talk about these things, right? So real quick, if the over under for Kenny Pickett was 6.5, which side?
I'm going under. I think
you think
Matt
it's 6,
Rule.
yeah.
I think it's 6. Matt Rule more so than any other head coach seems to love the players that he has a tie to, like Baylor guys, Temple guys. Of course, Kenny Pickett didn't play there, but he has an established relationship presumably with Kenny Pickett. I think, again, more so than any other coach, we had, Chip Kelly bringing in some Oregon guys when he was in Philly. But look at that roster in Carolina. He had Hassan Reddick last year, PJ Walker and Robbie Anderson. He's always bringing in players that he knows. And I think he needs someone that can play right away, and that maybe Malik Willis, the future, would be bright for him in Carolina eventually. But Matt Rule needs to win this season if he's going to be fired. So I really think he's going to go number 6 overall.
I left a team off of my quarterback list, Seattle. So let's say Malik Willis 9.5.
I'm leaning toward under there as well.
Okay.
I think and maybe it's too much of a layup, but the Russell Wilson comparison, of course, Wilson was a lot more ready to start. But early in his career in 2012, like those first couple starts, like he looked like a deer in headlights a little bit and kind of leaned on his legs early. And we've seen from Russell Wilson being probably one of the earlier examples of it. Deshaun Watson and Josh Allen were 2 quarterbacks early on, looked a little bit like they weren't going to be able to read coverages and understand where to go with the football. So they just looked at their first read, didn't like it, and took off. And it ultimately worked out for them. So I could really see the Seahawks saying, hey, we're not going to go into the season with Drew Lock as our quarterback. Let's go Malik Willis. They don't seem like fully committed to a rebuild. Otherwise, I think Tyler Lockett and or DK Metcalf would not be on the roster at this point. So I think Pickett at 6, Malik Willis at 9. We're 2 weeks away. A lot of crazy speculation, rumors can pop up. But right now it feels like those 2 spots seem like the most ripe for both of those quarterbacks.
Yeah, with the possibility of a trade up for Malik Willis. And then we kind of laid out 20.5 as a hinge. And I mean, there's a couple of Saints picks I do think would be awesome if the Eagles have that much confidence in Ridder and they're iffy about Hurts, for them to just take Ridder at 15. They have, I mean, when you have so much draft capital coming up, you can be more tolerant to risk. But I don't know that Ridder's not the risk pick out of those 3. I think he's actually the least risky. Okay, wide receivers. First, it's 5 in the first round. Now, I think it was maybe Peter Schrager saying 5 in the top 20. Is this another case of a poor class and wide receiver explosion of cost driving these players up the board? Or do you think these are legit guys that, hey, if your team spends a top 20 pick on them, it was a good pick?
I think it's more so the former than the latter, that just everyone wants wide receivers. I think the fantasy football element is a huge part of today. What we just saw, Dan Orlovsky from ESPN earlier today tweeted that the top 10 or top 5 at the receiver spot average per year actually is higher than edge rusher now. So that could indicate that the league's like, hey, this is the second most important position on the field, obviously, with Stephon Diggs signing the extension, the trades of Hill and Adams that you mentioned, a lot of movement at the wide receiver spot. I like the wide receiver class, but I do think it's more cost and just positional value driven than, hey, this is like a really high end, top end wide receiver class. I like it, but I think we've seen certainly last year better classes in terms of top end talent as opposed to or compared to what will ultimately how many wide receivers we see in the first round.
Okay, so there's 5, and they're kind of different. There's similarities. I mean, 2 went to Ohio State. And there's Jamison Williams, who has the injury unknown. Treylon Burks, more of a projection. Drake London, a specific type of receiver that maybe not every offense stresses. Who's your number 1 and why?
Drake London's my wide receiver number 1. And I will say that with the caveat of I've been burned by the bigger wide receivers in the past, like Hakeem Butler, like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. But I feel like Drake London is different from those types in that he's a lot more flexible. He's a lot more sudden. I've probably said this 15 times on radio spots over the last couple of months. He spent time with the USC basketball team. So like he's a high level basketball player as well. And I think that shows in his ability to get open. But that's not why he's my number 1 wide receiver. I think he's good enough creating separation. Yards after the catch, I think he's outstanding in that area. He's just impossible to bring to the turf. The contact balance is awesome. I love that he led all of college football in contested catches. So even if he's not creating a ton of separation like Garrett Wilson or Jameson Williams, he's going to go up and get it. He has the traits to do that, ball tracking. He's my number one. I think he is different, and that's what you kind of mentioned about this class.
Mhm.
There's similarities, but there's not really, of course, there's not a Jamar Chase. There's not even, to me, a Jalen Waddle where it's like this guy ticks all the boxes. You can see, hey, is Drake London too tall? Can he not separate? Are Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson too light? Are they going to be able to deal with the physicality that they're going to see at the NFL level? What's the deal with Jameson Williams? His injury, only 1 year of major production, and Treylon Burks didn't really run a full route tree. It was really go routes, slants, and bubble screen. So I think it kind of makes it fascinating to just evaluate these wide receivers because they all do kind of have at least one clear-cut flaw, and then to ultimately see where they go, where the league values them inside the first round.
And it really makes sense that you could say, we could do homework, Chris, right? And it's like, okay, you're this team. Give me a wide receiver board. And then if I gave you a different assignment, a different team, the board should be different. I would hope that the good organizations are stacking their board based on what qualities, what positions, what roles their schemes accentuate the importance of, and understanding. It's just like you see it like with the San Francisco Robert Saleh defense, right? Like cornerback is not an important position. Cornerback is a de-emphasized position. A lot of investment up front. Drake London, a classic X receiver. And how important is that in your offense? If you're the Rams, not really that important. Other teams, depending on the quarterback you have, maybe more important. And as we stack the board, as it's been mentioned, Jameson Williams might be your number one receiver, again, with the recovery from the ACL, but that looks like that is going well. You mentioned JJ Arcega-Whiteside. I just want to go back to this on the subject of big receivers. And what he really just put in stone in my draft edicts was wide receivers have to change speeds. You got to be able to change speeds. That's a key element of getting open in the NFL. And it's funny, I couldn't remember who said it. My lovely wife, Kate, and I were watching the Padres and the Giants for a little bit. Baseball's back, Noah playing a lot of baseball. Youth baseball is awesome, by the way. It's really exciting. Like watching 9 and 10-year-olds play kid pitch baseball for the first time and all the chaos. We had an 11-10 3-inning game. And anyway, I couldn't remember who it was that said back in the day, work fast, throw strikes, change speeds. Right? It's almost like that's wide receivers too, right? Work fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Speeds. One wide receiver on this topic it just popped into my head, and I want to say before I forget, David Bell from Purdue. I don't know if you've watched him. He, to me, is the best change pace, change speed wide receiver, and he ran 4.7, 4.74. He may go undrafted because of how bad his combine was, but he was so productive at Purdue against Ohio State corners, Michigan corners. It didn't matter because he does exactly that. So anyone that wants to kind of see what Sig is talking about, watch David Bell, that he almost knows he's not that explosive, but he's almost running 60%, then 80%, then 100%, then down to 50%. He does a great job to actually create separation. I think we all think that the true separators need to be 40-inch vertical, 11-foot broad jump, 4.3 guys, but David Bell from Purdue is someone that I could see out playing his draft position because he generates separation based on exactly what you were just talking about.
It's fun to reminisce on this stuff. Going out on the all-star road trip back in the 07, 08, 09, 06, I think was the first time I went to the Shrine game. And I was always reminded of watching those lumberjack competitions that were on ESPN in the 80s. Was something else, man. You never knew what you would find. And lumberjack
ESPN too.
Yeah, the Ocho. I forget which movie that was in. Yeah. Anyway, I wrote my Com 101 at the Newhouse at Syracuse. I wrote my paper as a freshman on ESPN2. That dates it, right? That dates me. When ESPN was, I think I titled it "Congrats, it's a sports channel, the birth of ESPN2" or something like that. Anyway, I'm reminded though, Chris, when it comes to wide receivers and cornerbacks, of the log rolling. I've mentioned this on the show a few times. The people listen to the show for years have heard me tell this. But when you watch the log rolling, it's this real interesting interplay of mind and body, because the people, they're watching the feet of the other person rotating the log. If you haven't seen log rolling, they're both standing on a log. There's like a tape line in the middle, and they're changing the rotation to clockwise, counterclockwise, trying to dump the other guy into the water. And you're watching their feet while your brain is it's like receiving the visuals of the other feet, knowing what you have to react to, while you're also your brain is telling your body what to do, and you're playing offense and playing defense, right? That's how you get tumped over, is if you get off balance. And I feel like wide receivers are playing that game with cornerbacks, basically. And you watch the good receivers at route running, like you said, creating separation isn't necessarily about being twitchy. It isn't necessarily about lateral agility. It isn't necessarily about burst through the routes. Although if you're going to be a receiver who runs routes more than 15 yards downfield in the NFL, you better eat up that cushion quickly. I mean, you have to. Putting that aside, it's the wide receivers, Chris, that are basically running routes against themselves in their head, kind of. And I remember watching Danny Amendola at the Texas versus the Nation game in practice. And this is one of the reasons why going to the All-Star games can have this value, like an epiphany. And I was watching him running his routes, Chris, and he was running routes against like the perfect route. He wasn't running routes against his opponent. He was clearly, it was almost like a martial art, the way he was running routes. And he also not very athletic, right? Didn't get drafted, had a pretty good career. Good career. And then there's the contested catches debate, which I think that Twitter, unfortunately, has not helped with this, because it doesn't lend itself to nuance. I mean, the reality is contested catches a good or a bad thing if it's part of a wide receiver's profile? Well, you need context. You can't answer that. It's like, I refuse to answer without more context. That should be the answer. Have you seen this? Are you familiar with this contested catch debate? You want to weigh in anywhere in this hot potato?
Yeah, I know. I think that's the perfect answer, in that it is definitely a trait that you want out of your wide receiver. If he's only making contested catches, not great after the catch, not a nuanced route runner, not necessarily an athletic route runner, but if he's not a polished route runner, that's a problem. And I think, the guys that I already laid out, Hakeem Butler, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Laquan Treadwell, bigger contested catch guys, looking back, they're kind of cautionary tales of, almost all of their catches were because they could not get open because they didn't have some of the other things. So yes,
Right.
I want my Jahan Dotsons, Chris Olaves. If they don't have the contested catch ability, that's going to ding their score for me, and it's going to push down where they ultimately land on my big board.
Right. You would almost want to. Someone can take this and run with it. PFF might have already done it, for all I know. So the big stat on contested catches, right, is contested catch percentage one, right? What percentage of the contested catches do they win? But like you said, maybe the right stat is what percentage of their catches are contested catches.
Yeah,
That's maybe a higher level sorting factor than that percentage. And then like you said, context. I mean, look, if a guy can separate, then contested catch isn't as important. Somebody like KJ Hamler, I don't know, if he doesn't win contested catches, well, I mean, you're hopefully throwing to him when he's behind the defense anyway. So context, it's always context. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about the draft, because again, any topic is an on-ramp. Before we go off the rails, real quick, tell me something else that really fascinates you about this draft. A player story, a decision a team has to make, something that is pulling you in when you're looking at this draft.
probably the cornerback class. That, to me, seeing this shift at wide receiver is arguably the second most important position on the field. All the best offenses, best teams have that one legitimate star, at least number one star. And some of them have 2 and 3 really good wide receivers. Conversely, you got to have good cornerbacks if you're almost every week going to be seeing a high-powered aerial attack in the NFL. And it's like this cornerback class. You have Ahmad Gardner, who is the odds-on favorite to be the first corner off the board, probably inside the top 10. He's fascinating to me because of how clean his film is, but the fact that I'm a little bit concerned that he's maybe too tall, that being 6'3" is not exactly how I want my corner today. If he's going to deal with all these smaller separators, the guys that not only run nuanced routes, but also are super twitchy, can get off the line of scrimmage in a hurry, the intrigue around Derek Stingley, that he was the best cornerback in college football at 18 years old in 2019, and then a bit of an enigma after that. And then there's just so many corners, and maybe this is just me watching as many prospects as I need to watch. Cam Taylor-Britt from Nebraska, I think, is a great player. Damari Mathis from Pittsburgh. Tariq Castro-Fields from Penn State. Andrew Booth should go relatively high, I think, even in the first round, but has been injured during the pre-draft process. We don't really know what to make of him. And then you have these two Washington cornerbacks, Trent McDuffie and Kyler Gordon, that were in such a soft zone style defense that it's really hard to project them at all in man coverage. So does that take out a bunch of teams that are going to say, hey, we are from the Bill Belichick tree. We want to play a lot of man coverage. We like you, but maybe you're going to be picked later than a lot of people think because you are so zone experience, as opposed to a lot of the top first round corners are usually those press man types. So I think it's a really fascinating time for the cornerback market, for what teams do with the cornerback spot. And then this class has a lot of names, but there's all like question marks about all of them. And then to me, a bunch of really good ones on the second day of the draft.
Yeah, I'm reminded, you mentioned if wide receivers are so valuable, then cornerbacks should be equal value. And I love the paradigm, the Eustace Mosqueda creator-preventer paradigm, right? The creator is the receiver, the preventer is the corner, the creator is the edge, the preventer is the tackle. I like what you talked about with Sauce Gardner. Cincinnati, man, Cincinnati on in this conversation, the Bearcats. That was my high school's Bentworth, Pennsylvania. That was our mascot, and I loved Cincinnati just because it was the only other Bearcat I heard of. But he would make more sense. He's a guy who can wipe out Drake London, right? The classic X. So if you need a corner, a long athletic corner who's aggressive to face up against a classic X of Mike Evans, and this is one of those things too, where you look at the division. I know it's simplistic, but teams draft to win their division first and foremost. And depending on who is the thorn in your side, that might make some of your decisions. As knowing thyself, knowing your scheme, knowing what's important and what's less important, you sort it out. And who knows, maybe the Giants might trade James Bradberry just to replace him with basically another James Bradberry in Gardner. All right, just a couple minutes to go off the rails here. I guess, Chris, the simplest thing, and we were reminiscing before the show about when we were just cutting our teeth in the draft. It was a first love in terms of football and thinking about football and wanting to go deeper. However, I want to ask you just what's something else that you could easily just swim around in the ocean of and do the same thing that you've done with the NFL draft and football?
I don't know. That's pretty tough. And to be specific, like you mentioned, I've always loved the NFL draft. I think it was a perfect.
What's your earliest NFL draft memory? What's your earliest NFL draft memory?
Probably the Bills picking Todd Collins after Jim Kelly, and then me being like randomly a Michigan fan. I don't even know why. I'm from Western New York. My dad has really no connection to the University of Michigan, but we always, I think, kind of just liked Michigan more than Ohio State. And I was 8 years old, whatever it was, and elated that in the second round the Bills picked Todd Collins to be the heir apparent to Jim Kelly. Of course, that didn't really work out whatsoever, but that was like one where it kind of got me energized for the NFL draft to like have, I mean, not that I was scouting players when I was 9, but like to watch college football and kind of have just in the back of my mind as a kid, like, hey, where could this guy be picked? Is this guy someone that could go in the first round? Could the Bills use him? Just growing up in Western New York. So probably that Todd Collins one, not the best memory, but that might be the earliest.
Yeah, it's funny how it's definitely a way, first and foremost, to be more connected to your team. Like I vaguely remember the Steelers taking Walter Abercrombie, and it was not received as a good pick, and it wasn't really a good pick. And Mike Merriweather, who ended up being an excellent pick in '82. But really, the first pick I can remember clearly was Gabe Rivera, who looked like he was going to be outstanding, and then ended up paralyzed.
'83
in a car accident. And then the next year they got Louis Lips, who came to Bentleyville to open up the Sheets. And Sheets is better than Wawa. Sorry, I don't want to start any civil wars here. You mentioned Michigan, Ohio State, by the way. That is a civil war. We're headed up to Ann Arbor again soon. Spent some good time up there. My wife's mother lives there, and her brother. And man, Michigan, Ohio State is so deep that like someone might be giving someone CPR and then they find out like they're from Ohio State. Oh, let them die. I'm really kidding, but sometimes you wonder the way people are about Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan finally getting over. Since you mentioned Bills, even though we're off the rails, we're just going to end up in football again. It's great, like all roads lead back to football. But I got to ask you, because your heart's with the Bills. How are you feeling? Are you really getting accustomed to the idea that your team is in the Super Bowl conversation every year again, just like when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think I'm accustomed to it now because they've kind of been in that realm the last at least 2 seasons, going into the third year now. It definitely took some time to get accustomed to because those memories in the early 90s are a little hazy for me. I do remember, though, what's funny is that when the Bills weren't in the Super Bowl, like the fifth, that what would have been the fifth straight year, I vividly remember asking my dad, like, why are the Bills not in the Super Bowl? Because it was that, like, I was used to them being in the Super Bowl. And then when they didn't make the playoffs, I was like, wait, why aren't the Bills playing anymore? Like, it's the playoffs, because they had made the playoffs so many years into the late 90s with the, Doug Flutie and Rob Johnson. So it's definitely what's fun for me, especially, and what's different is that me growing up as a Bills fan, but now being in the NFL media, it's fun for me because I can step away and say, hey, the Bills lost this game because of this, X, Y, and Z. I need to write about it. I need to evaluate what happened, what their biggest draft needs are. For me, what's fun is watching my dad, watching my friends, random people at the grocery store that I vaguely know, but they know that I'm a writer. They're wearing their Bills hat. Like the energy truly in Western New York, that so many people that I know close to me or just from afar, just feeling that is fun for me to be like, hey, these guys, this is an accountant, this is a teacher, this is a dentist, and they're all just very looking forward to and amped up for this Bill season.
Oh yeah, it's great. I so want the Bills to do it. We're just really briefly, just like a 10-second or less answer, because this crosses over. Were you for or against the Josh Allen pick when it happened?
Against.
Well, I'm happy it worked
Against.
out for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was against, just quickly,
Yeah.
because, and I kind of call it the Patrick Mahomes line. The draft
Mhm.
before, I felt like before 2017, everyone in the NFL was looking for stoic pocket passer. Just find the guy that can dink and dunk, be a Tom Brady, be a Drew Brees, be a Ben Roethlisberger to a certain degree later in his career, Eli Manning even. And
Mhm.
then after Patrick Mahomes, I think it's shifted to roll the dice for the high upside player, the high athleticism, the big arm. And it kind of was a thought that once a quarterback gets into the NFL, he can't get more accurate. He can't rein in bad pocket presence. And we've seen with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, to a lesser degree, Justin Herbert, much lesser degree, Deshaun Watson. It's kind of the opposite. And it's part of the reason why I have shifted my philosophy and my thinking on quarterbacks. And part of the reason why I have Malik Willis as my quarterback one in this draft.
Yeah, I think that the big thing there, what I see, Chris, is those quarterbacks, the outside of structure quarterbacks. Matt Waldman gave us that outside of structure. They can change the terms of engagement with the defense. Defenses have become so good at defending pocket passing, like stationary pocket passing, that you need a quarterback who can change those terms and win on those terms. But I do want to do very quickly an ode to Buffalo, because I think that you mentioned that time in the 90s. The 30 for 30 is excellent. What the Buffalo Bills did going to 4 straight Super Bowls is more impressive than many Super Bowl champions. It's more impressive than so many of the teams that won Super Bowls, what that organization did. And it just hurts my heart that they haven't won a Super Bowl. And then you start getting into things like the Music City Miracle and what happened at the end of the game, the 13 seconds. I mean, these things go into lore wide right, where you don't even need, you just say the words and there's an emotional like nuclear bomb of energy with these moments on both sides. And I just want to see Brett Hall. I just want to see that moment, because Pittsburgh and Buffalo are like family members in terms of the cities, the character of the people, even like some of the different way the ethnicities and the kind of neighborhoods and what you find in the neighborhoods. And I want it to happen. I want it to happen for Josh Allen. I want it to happen for so many people. And they certainly had an offseason that shows me that they're up to the task of what the challenge the AFC is presenting. And Chris Trapasso is always up to the task of breaking down the NFL draft in a way to help you enjoy it more and enjoy being a fan of the NFL more. And you help us enjoy what we do more. Well, we enjoyed it anyway, even without you. But you allow us to do it to pay the bills, which is pretty sweet and nice of you. So thank you for that. And I hope we continue to keep bringing you something that you like enough so we can keep doing this, because
this is my favorite.
Go ahead.
This is my favorite interview that I do during the pre-draft process, because I feel like with you, I don't have to hold anything back. I can be as nerdy and philosophical as possible. And just a quick answer on that previous question. I wasn't doing draft stuff. Human psychology is really fascinating to me. And then kind of a branch off from that recently, the powers and the influence of sleep on humans, I think is really fascinating.
Yes.
And how as society, we all go to bed too late. We're on our phones before bed, and just a lot of the problems that can arise when you're not getting as much sleep as you need to, or if your sleep just isn't the best quality. So those two things, I guess, when I'm not thinking about football philosophies and theories outside of spending time with my family, I'm thinking about just why humans behave in a certain way, nature versus nurture, and then all the sleep stuff the last couple of years.
Well, human psychology is like, maybe it's all at once. It's one of the most unknowable and yet elusive enough, not so elusive to make you feel like you can understand it. You can understand it when we shrink it down to like one question, but sleep gets into, I've heard that sleep deprivation, maybe I've experienced it, is more intense than many drugs as far as skewing your perceptions. And because my name is Sigmund, we talk about dream interpretation. I could tell every story. Just not that long ago, my wife and I had a moment when we both awoke at the same time. We were both having very vivid, emotionally charged dreams. And in both dreams, at the moment we awoke, glass broke in each of our dreams. Whoa. And we both woke up. And then we ended up talking for hours in the middle of the night. Dreams, man. Sigmund Bloom is going to go Sigmund Freud here on the couch. Chris, bringing it all together for us. As always, folks, again, we appreciate you.